dates, and we're covering five virtues each meeting from this time till the end. And the things that we're going to be looking at in each virtue, it's pretty much a study guide on David Isaac's book, The Guide for Parents and Teachers on Character Building. And so it's parenting, and I'm going to be using a bunch of other parenting and virtue building things, but just this book will be the main format that we'll be using. So that's why I sent the books to Father to be able to um, have that as a resource for you in between classes if you need that. So the first part in what we're looking at here, um, just a review that I had sent the ages that children can learn virtues, and there's just as a recommendation to say when they're younger, they're going to learn some basic virtues and build on that. And as a lot of spiritual writers and saints have written, that focusing on one virtue and trying to build that one, they're linked to other virtues. And so you will grow. And it's a lot easier to practice one virtue and grow in that than to try to grow all virtues together at once. It will wear you out. So it's easier just to start with one and to build on that as you go. So that was that first page. The second page was looking at the part we had talked about last time, with that path from your emotion feeling bad to calming it down, and the path that you go through to do that. You're expressing it in part one, and that's, I refer to the back of your brain, but it's your amygdala, your limbic system, that fight flight response. That is where your reactions are going to come from first to keep you safe. Then the prefrontal cortex and a more thoughtful place can also show up. And so you'll have two responses to everything, was kind of the really generalization of what we covered last time. And so just that they're going at different speeds, they have different purposes, but they're both turned on. So one is to keep you safe, and the other is to work towards building virtue. And so overall, the template that we're building is to shift from what society has, where emotions are first and we want to be following your emotions. We're going to shift it to developing, we're seeking truth and good. And then the feelings will line up behind the good that we're trying to do. And so that way, even if it's difficult, we can keep working and build a virtue, where if you put it emotions in front, a lot of times virtue is going to be hard to follow because it's difficult to start practicing a virtue, where it's easy to practice avoiding, or the temptation to turn away from virtue. And then that last handout was from the Han Foundation, which was from the Mind Up curriculum that I'm using in the Catholic schools here. So that's the biology behind it, but there's a program for preschool all the way up through eighth grade that's talking about the different parts of your brain and how they work, and how to shift and put that calm part of you in charge instead of reacting to the emotions. And something that I like about that series, it's not Christian in any way. It's really more of a science, research based type of book, but it really gives activities that ties into four different school subjects for each skill that they're building. And so it's a nice 15-minute lesson plan for people that are teaching in a classroom, to be able to practice that and fit it into the school curriculum. So it's just a resource for you. So today, the first virtue we're going to be covering is generosity. And so starting with the idea with generosity is this, each of these questions will be looking at, am I doing that? And so the first 10 points are asking, am I doing that? Is that something that I need to practice in my own life? And the second 10 questions will be talking about, here's things that can help with helping your children, or any children that you're working with, to be able to develop that, to practice that virtue. And so one of the things that would be helpful is, if you can rate, with each of these items, am I doing that? And rating it from 1 to 5. And what I put on the handout on that first page was saying that 1 is, I don't think this really reflects my situation at all. and you're rating it from 1 to 5. So 1 is no, that doesn't fit me, and 5 is I completely agree with this statement. It reflects my situation. And so if it helps to think of it as 1 is like no, 3 is like 50-50, 5 is like 100%. And then so 2 would be like 25% of the time, and 4 would be 70%, 75% of the time. It's just to make it an easy way to adjust that to rate it for yourself. Okay. So this first part, and just looking at, if you have that handout on the first session on generosity, we're looking at, am I generous myself? Do I make an effort to meet people's needs? And that's what are their real needs, and how do you figure that out? And so, we should do things for others when they have a real need. And it's not a question of satisfying their whims or giving into what, oh, when I have some leftovers, then you can get some of that. This is really, I'm wanting to make this where I'm looking at what are their real needs and how much can I help them. The second one there is I recognize that my talents and capacities and my qualities, knowledge, that I put them at the service of others. So that another part of generosity is saying, like, well, what are my skills? What are my abilities? How do I use them? If I'm good at singing, then maybe I can be, helping them uh, with some of developing some of those talents. If I'm good at accounting, I might be using that to help others to, balance their budget or develop a routine that way. Sometimes I have hidden capacities, um, which I don't really utilize. And so that's something to say I have to um, find the qualities that I have. And so if it's like I'm really shy or I'm really timid, one of the things that I would use for that is saying, like, if as people are in high school, college, older, when they're applying for a job. Um, One of the things that I find a lot of times is people are like, "Oh, I can't apply; they won't hire me," and they have that fear. And so to give them the example of saying, "Okay, what if we shifted around the other way, and you're the boss, and you have a business, and you need some help. Now you want help; that's why you put the sign out, help wanted, hiring." And so if you're being the boss and I'm the person applying and you need people to do the job, and I show up and I say, like, hey, I'm somebody who knows how to learn. I can be trained. I can do whatever job. I show up on time. I can do what's needed to be done. And I really want to do a good job. And if you're the boss, how do you like that person? That's one way. Or I could come as somebody who's really scared and say, oh, I don't know if you'll hire me, and I don't know if I can do this job. And what do you think? And then you're the boss. Would you hire the first person or the second person? And pretty easy, people can say, oh, I'll hire the first one. So it's a way to demonstrate, like, oh, if you're being timid, here's a way we can practice, and I could help you with reducing some of that shyness, that anxiety. So that's kind of saying using my talents and capacities to help someone else. The third one is understanding, my own position, my possessions, my time, and my effort, and what are they worth? And this one is because I'm involved in the Boy Scouts. We're doing an Eagle project next weekend. They're putting up uh, a dog play area beside a retirement home. And so they're building the fence, putting in some benches, digging some holes. And so the idea is, can I use my time? What's my time worth? And that's something where we're asking the boys that are doing these projects, saying, like, what's the project worth? And they're like, and then look at how much the fence cost and how much the post cost. And I say, well, how about, you had 100 hours worth of people working there. What's that worth? And they're like, I don't know. They're saying, like, well, if you are hiring that many people to work for hours and you're paying them by the hour, and here in this area, they're saying, okay, we'll just figure volunteer hours are worth $25 per person per hour. So now, if you have 100 people working for an hour, now you're looking at, hey, that's a $2,500 project, plus the cost of materials and the lunch and the tools that you needed. So it's the idea of, what is my time worth? What is my possession worth? What is something, if I had to go get this and hire it done, what would that be worth? To think of yourself as having value. And it's not something where you're really trying to, put somebody down or let them be taken advantage of. Like somebody, and I know it's something in a lot of organizations where they're saying like, "Hey, you're here. We'll hire you for 20 hours, but we'll work you for 40." Just they'll keep. I had a friend of mine whose wife was working at a company, and they said, "Oh, you did such a good job. Now we'll give you this responsibility." And so pretty soon she's like an assistant manager, but they're still paying her like a receptionist. And so that idea of like, hey, my time is worth some, if I'm doing more administration, I want to be, valued for that. And then you're looking at, the value of your faith, of your home, things that, are really maybe priceless, that sense of what is my faith worth? How much would I do to help that? How much is sharing my faith with someone else? And that's just a way to think about that third one. The fourth one is how often do I do things for others? And where you're looking at, well, do I do things, I'm really generous and I do things all the time? Or is it like, well, maybe once a week, or maybe it's down to once a month, or saying, once a year. I'm just helping people when I have that nothing else to do. And, so when you're being generous and you're practicing the virtue of generosity, that you're wanting to be, I'm doing this as a special, I'm help for that person. And it requires me to carry out acts frequently. And so if the more generous, the more frequently I'm going to do that. The fifth one there is talking about I carry out the following actions frequently, like lending things, giving things away. I'm available. I listen to others. I make reasonable demands on people. And you're kind of looking at, as a generous person, how often are you doing that? Um, so some people would say it doesn't take a lot of effort to be generous, and other people say, well, it's really hard to be generous, especially if you've been hurt or if you've been taken advantage of. Um, and so that's another way to look at like being generous is more, it's not just the things that I'm doing, it's just like, well, how much is that taking out of me to do that? So um, that's really saying it's going to be more valuable for people that are working harder to do it. And that's more of a philosophy discussion on, the value of somebody who's doing it just because, well, hey, it was on my way, or somebody said, hey, this was difficult, or hey, it was way out of my way and I went and I really helped them. That would make a big difference because I'm making more of a sacrifice, uh, gives it more value. Uh, Number six is looking at, do I let other people be generous to me? And one of the things that I find a lot as a therapist is that the caring people tend to be, I'm taking care of, my spouse, my kids, my boss, my friends. They never put themselves on the list. They're caring for everyone else, and then their name is never on the list. So taking a turn, and that might be a good exercise to say, where we're taking turns as a family, where, I'm doing stuff for my children and then they do things for me, or they're helping out for me, or at school, I'm doing stuff for the students, they're doing stuff for me. We're taking turns, we're helping each other. And so I'm letting them do things for me. And a lot of times for caring people, it's really tough to be receiving the care. They think, oh, that it's might be too selfish to be receiving care. I should be doing for you. And let's try to get a balance there where I'm giving and I'm taking turns is a nice way to get around that. I'm taking turns instead of just I'm giving all the time. Um, I had a teacher at college that at the end of the classes here, they have this rating of the instructors saying like, what did you like? What did they teach well? What should they improve on? And people were giving him compliments. And I remember he was saying like, oh, it was nothing. Oh, it was nothing. And one of the students got mad and said, what are you saying that for? You're robbing me of a chance to be nice to you. Accept the compliment. He's like, oh, I didn't realize I was, robbing you. So it's like, so when I give you a compliment, it's like, yes, thank you is a good response instead of like, no, no, don't give me that compliment. No, it's nothing. Say like, thank you. That was nice. Okay. Number seven is I forgive others. And they said that was probably one of the most difficult things in being generous is like, can I forgive them? And that's where you could have this range of responses where some people are easy to forgive because you're like, okay, they're good and that was a mistake. But some folks are really difficult to forgive. And in our readings for Sunday, for Mass today, they talked about St. Paul. In the earlier chapters in Acts, he had his conversion. And then we go to the Galatians, and it's talking about how, well, after his conversions, he went to Damascus, his sight was restored. Then he went into the desert for 3 years to pray and ponder what happened in that meeting with Jesus on the road to Damascus. Then he went back to Damascus. This time, instead of to arrest people, he's being an evangelist. And so the people were like, oh my gosh, you were the guy that came from Jerusalem with the letters to arrest us. And so after 3 years, he went back to Jerusalem, and the apostles are like, no, we're not going to let you in. No, we don't trust you. You're just, going to trick us and find out who we are and arrest us. And Barnabas took him and said, okay, I will vouch for him. And so he comes back. And so he spent 15 days with Peter and the others there. And then he was trying to preach in Jerusalem, but that's where he started. And that's where he had been part of that group that martyred Stephen. And so then when he was preaching to the Greeks wanted to kill him. It's like, hey, it's 3 years later, but you're the guy. So their sense of generosity and forgiveness was really tough, because look at the violence he had done. He had killed one of the members of the church. And so then the brothers took him and sent him back up to Tarsus and let him go preach to the Gentiles, because people were having a difficult time being generous to somebody who killed some of their family members. And so that forgiving others, there's a whole range of responses and what it takes, and a lot of prayer and repentance. And Father probably can talk about God's mercy and the need for that as well. Number 8, we're talking about I make an effort to overcome tiredness, illness, or laziness in order to assist others. And some people are only prepared to help others when they've well slept, I'm in a good mood, and I've had dinner. Let me go help you now. And it's a lot harder when I'm tired. And so part of that virtue of generosity is I'm able to then be generous even when I get tired. Or even if I get hungry, I can keep being generous. And practicing that, it does take practice to be able to still be generous even when your mood is starting to pull you into snapping at people. So and I guess that's the part we're looking at with these virtues, is that they do take time and practice to be able to bring up and practice that. So it looks like someone's sharing the screen. So that's the handout that I was talking about for folks that didn't have it, going through generosity. Thank you for who's doing that. Thanks. So we were just talking about making an effort to overcome the tiredness and illness and laziness, even if I'm not in that mood. So useful exercises might be to think about moments in the day or in what circumstances it tend to be more or less generous. So I can look back at the end of the day and say, how was I doing? Like, am I more generous in the morning, or am I more generous in the afternoon? Or some people are night people and they're really generous in the evening. And then trying to work around that, but to gradually try to expand that. Once you figure out, like, this is my easy place, I'm going to try to expand that to cover more areas. Number 9 is I'm trying to make others make an effort to help others, seeking their good rather than my own satisfaction, and without thinking of what I can ask them in return. So the idea isn't like, hey, I did this for you, so now when I'm going to go build my shed, I want you to come on over and free labor for me because I helped you. It's more generous to say, like, I'm helping you because you need it. And we're working towards that, where you might start with, like, okay, I did this for you, you did this for me, and we're taking turns. That's a good place to start. But you really want to work on building it towards where I'm going to do it without counting the cost. I'm giving, it's like parents giving to their kids to say, okay, I'm raising you because you're little and you need to know how to be a grown-up. And we're going to give you that chance to practice that. And so the idea there is, if somebody's doing things that are difficult, can I slow down enough to get myself in that space to say, I'm going to be generous to this person, even though they're, maybe a difficult personality, or they have a temper, or those kind of things. Number 10 is I'm making an effort to help those who most need my attention. And so with that one, more often than not, it's easier to be generous towards some people than toward others. And for example, towards your spouse or your children, is easier than being generous to a neighbor, or it's easier to help a friend at work than to help someone who's less likable. And it's more disagreeable because we have some wide range of people and you're dealing with a lot of different kinds. Some people are easy to get along with, and some people are difficult. Some people think like you, and some people think way different than you do. Can I still be generous even if they think different than I do? And so that's I just covered that those first 10 points as a discussion, and give you a chance to look at that and think about that. But I just now shift and say, any questions or comments, things to clarify about being generous there? Is that a helpful kind of a starting point to look at practicing generosity?
That was very helpful because sometimes we are guilty of acknowledging the generosity of others to us. We may see it as simplicity, but sometimes we hurt their feelings by not accepting their generosity and acknowledging it. But there's also another dimension. There are persons who are generous to you, but they tend to publicize it, or they are being generous to you is not genuine. In that sense, when you discern that a person is not genuine in their generosity towards you, and when they are generous to you, the whole world tends to know about it. And when you notice that and you decided to humbly and calmly decline, or some persons are generous to you because they want to, but again, they are complaining later on, something like that, and you notice all of that, and you choose not to accept their offer or their generosity. Is that kind of is it good? Because they may not know why you're making the decision of not wanting to keep receiving gift from them, for this good reason that one, they need it more. Secondly, they have the tendency of letting the whole world know what they're doing. Something like that, yeah.
And I saw in the chat that someone wants to speak a little more about number 10 again. So making an effort to help those that most need my attention. And that's really what we were talking about. If someone needs my attention, if they're easy to get along with, I'm generous to them. But if they need my attention, but they're difficult people, I want to be able to be generous to them, even if they're difficult people. If that answers that. So it's just as saying, I'm seeing that there's a need there for my help. I want to be helpful to them, separate from if they're people I like or people that are fun to be around. I want to help them, even if they're a difficult person, or like say they have anger, or they're talking to you in a way that really makes it difficult. Like we have some people in our group that um, they are slightly autistic, and so they'll tell you half the sentence and then pause, like, this is how I talk. And then you start answering them and they're like, no, and then they give you the other half of the sentence, and then they're mad that you didn't answer the right question. So it's like it's difficult to talk to them because they get angry really fast. And so then to say, okay, now we know, is there more? I have to ask this person, is there some more information? Are you talking about this topic, or is there something else? And so I have learned to ask them for more information before I start answering, because otherwise they feel like they're getting attacked instead of helped. So that's just an example for that. So then the next virtue we were going to cover is
Sent a
fortitude.
question. Yeah, before you move on to, yeah, someone sent a question that, do generosity and humility go hand in hand?
Yes. And so a lot of the spiritual writers are saying, like, if you practice humility, then the other virtues are built in place along with them. So yes, it does go hand in hand. Okay. So with fortitude, So fortitude in a situation, it makes it in situations where it's difficult to improve. Courageous people resist harmful influences and withstand the difficulties to strive to act positively, to overcome obstacles, and undertake great deeds. And so, with fortitude, what we're looking at is having, um, again, do I practice fortitude? Is like I usually try to discover what's the right thing to do in this situation. And so we should not make decisions or react with the first things we think about. And that's why we talked last time about I have these two different reactions, the fast reaction and the more thoughtful reaction. That second reaction is going to have more chance of fortitude, where my first one is going to be more fight flight, and I might be overreacting to things. And so I want to be able to uh, think first about what I'm doing and then say, okay, what's the standard or what's the criteria I can apply to this? And we shouldn't let ourselves be carried away by emotions of the moment. And so that's going to be a theme that we're going to be seeing throughout this whole series is I really don't want to be just swept in with whatever emotion comes up first. I want to be looking at what's the truth, what's the good that I want to practice. And I want to try to discover what's the right thing to do in the situation. Okay. So the second one then is looking at, I'm trying to overcome laziness and routine and blind imitation of others by thinking for myself about what's really right. And so the idea is I want to get to know what right requires, what effort is needed, and the effort is to overcome the basic tendency. So it's like if I spend some time looking at what is the right thing to do here. And like if I'm a student, the right thing is studying to learn the material to be able to have that knowledge. And it takes practice getting it in. Like with children, it's easy to say they get a spelling list in Monday and they have to practice it every day of the week, and then they have a test on Friday. So they have 5 times of practicing to get the knowledge into their brain. So then they're practicing and then they have review tests and those kind of things. So that studying is the right thing to do as a child in school. I have to do the homework. And so a lot of times it's like, oh, I'll do it later. I don't want to do it. And so for practicing, if you're saying I want to teach children about that, the idea is I'm going to give them something that's a little bit hard. And I'm going to figure, well, they won't do it right. But I'm going to say, okay, here, something you can do. Like you have a half hour to do your homework and figure what will they get done. And if they don't get it done, saying like, hey, that was good. Now let's try again and get a little more done. So it's like we're doing it in blocks and checking it and then moving forward and checking it so that the idea is they're practicing doing that and say, okay, now we have to look at how do we practice that and be able to build that structure, that routine. And they say, like, I'm overcoming the routine or blind imitation of others, like I'm just doing it because everyone else is doing. Am I thinking about what's really right? And so that might be more looking at adults who are saying, am I just, like saying, I'm saying my prayers. They're like, okay, but I'm really thinking about, the soccer game. Am I just there saying the words? I'm doing it like a routine. Or am I doing it just like, hey, they're doing that, I'll do that. I'm copying what they're doing. Or am I thinking about what's really there? So that's maybe in your prayer life is looking at practicing that meditation, that study, and trying to learn more. And that's something that I found in, you know, all the years that I've been studying, I keep learning more things about the God, about the saints, about virtue, and how to live these. So it's something that is, kind of a continuous growth. Number 3 is looking at, do I usually manage to focus on what's good for others, even if it takes an effort, or I have to suffer for having done so? And some people make peace their top value. Like, I just want to get along. I don't want to have any conflict. But understanding that peace is not the absence of effort. So I can have peace, but we're still moving forward. There's feeling satisfied as long as there's no conflict or no fighting is good, but good requires effort. And therefore, there is going to be some kind of suffering. It's not always compatible with the absence of effort. So the idea of if you're saying I'm going to try to do good, it's hard at first, and maybe that's the most difficult part is at the beginning but then it gets easier as I practice it. And where getting out of it being lazy is like, well, that's easy to do. And then it's really hard to get out of being lazy and start doing the good that I need to do. So if you're saying like, I'm going to focus on what's good for others, even if it takes effort. And so as a parent teaching a child, you're saying, okay, it's easier just to do it myself. I could get it done faster with less mess. Okay, but I'm trying to teach the children the fortitude. So we're going to have them do it. It's going to take longer initially, like teaching them to cook. It's harder. They make more of a mess. And so what we want to do is to try to say, well, can we make it fun? And say if we're making cookies or something, say like we're working fun and baking together, and they're playing in the flour, they're playing in the stuff. They're saying like, okay, so they're connecting fun and cooking, and they're learning how to cook, they're learning how to make things. And then we're cleaning up, same kind of thing. Now we're cleaning up the mess that they made and we're making that fun. So then I have fun and effort and me connected in an activity. Then as they learn it, I can back out, and then the effort is fun. The making cookies is fun because we have a lot of good memories there. And then to shift it to like, oh, it's easier for me to do the dishes myself than to have these kids and fight them to come in. And that was just as a side note, something that my wife and I used to our advantage is when it was after dinner time for the children to do the chores, they all left and they would hide and go, oh, we got other things to do. So my wife and I could have a nice conversation after dinner, and then when we were done visiting, we say, hey, kids, come back in. Now you have to clean the kitchen, do the dishes, and bring them back in. So then the same thing of you're saying, like, here's the chore that we're doing and fun and the parent, and we're doing it together. And it takes longer, there's more mess, but we're making fun memories with this activity. So then I can back out and the children have fun and doing this connected. It's like we're connecting the activities together to then say doing the effort is connected with some good feelings instead of a fight. Okay, number 4, we're looking at, do I make an effort to carry out everyday chores carefully and lovingly? And that's, although we may understand the fortitude is a virtue, like a chivalrous knight, that's going to rescue somebody, his fair love, or somebody like that. He's prepared to take a risk. Normally, fortitude in real life is expressed with little efforts that we do every day, things that we do that we can. So it's like, am I just, like if kids are cleaning the room, it's just like, hey, I cleaned off the first layer. and then now you see, oh, there's a second layer of dirty things. Let's go clean that too. And they're like, oh man, do we have to? And so we're looking at having that where I'm doing this because I care. I'm doing this to help them, or they're doing that to help me. And that's really where you're saying, I'm carrying this out lovingly or carefully. I want to get it done right instead of just slopping it through or hiding it. So, like, oh, yeah, it's put away when it was all just thrown in the closet. So, like, no, I still need to put my laundry away. Okay. Number 5 is I resist the temptations which the consumer society pushes at me. And that's overcoming whims, that impulse shopping, not being influenced by what others do, or reading and buying everything we can, that kind of thing, especially with the internet now. And they're just pushing things at you all the time, advertising all the time. And it's just like, man, when kids see that, they're like, I want that, I want that. And then getting them a break from the screen, getting them a break from the advertising, they calm down. Same kind of thing. If you're just saying like, hey, when we go, like if you're teaching fortitude to children, you're going to the store saying, hey, we have a list of what we're getting at the store. And they're like, oh, they see this toy they want, or they see that snack they want. So like, hey, we'd be glad to get that next time when it's on the list. When we get home, put it on the list. And the nice thing is when they aren't right there in front of it, their needs are a lot smaller. And so being able to say, very rare that they put the thing on the list when they got back home. They were more just impulse shopping, like, I want this right now because I see it, or that looks good right now. I want it right now. So being able to say, I'm not just going with whatever impulse hits me right away or advertising that gets to me. I really want to be able to step back and say, do I need that? How will I use that in my life? Okay. Number 6 here, I put up with physical discomfort without complaining. Ooh, that's a hard one for sure. To practice fortitude is, can I put up with stuff where I'm uncomfortable And I'm not just right away griping, telling everybody what I'm upset about. I want to be, and that's where the church is practicing prayer, almsgiving, and fasting, is to kind of help detach from having everything your way in all the time. So it's like I'm able to stay detached. And then in place of that, I want to put my focus on, life is a journey toward heaven. And I want to kind of bringing that to mind to say life is a journey towards heaven. This is not our home. This is the passage. This is the trail. We're going towards heaven. Let's focus on that. So then if I'm a little uncomfortable, I can do that without complaining because I'm looking past it to the goal, or I'm looking at, who it is that loves me, who it is that's going to be welcoming me into heaven. And we're hoping for that. Okay. Um, and that again is fortitude, is training your will so that you're not just griping about everything that doesn't go well. You're saying like, okay, I can be practicing my will to do the thing I need, the fortitude, I'm doing it, rather than I'm avoiding or shutting down. Number 7, we're talking about I'm making decisions with real initiative to do worthwhile things for the children or for others. And so this is like I'm being enthusiastic about life. And it helps us get out of the rut, and we can help others to think and organize and do interesting things. And so that is another part where you're saying, like, I'm thinking of what kind of things are worthwhile doing, things that I can do for them, things that I can do for the kids, for the school, for colleagues, for other adults, for friends. What's worthwhile doing? And then to kind of have that excitement. And something that you might see as a transition is initially when people are trying to do this is like, hey, let's go do this. And there's really more of a push to get somebody to do it with you. And then people could say, well, that's not working too well. I'm going to try bribery. Like, hey, if you do this, then, I'll get you a coffee afterwards, or, we'll get a snack or something, we'll do something um, to make it worthwhile that way, to see if they engage with that. And then when you're working then later to say, hey, we're a bunch of friends, we're going to go do this worthwhile thing. We're going to go help and, build this dog park. We're going to go help and, help the neighbor build something in his backyard, his porch or something like that, just because it's worthwhile. And we're being able to say, yeah, I'm here to help, and because you need it. Okay, now number 8 is making an effort not to get used to what is evil just because there seems to be so much of it around. And that's really, I mean, when he wrote this book was a long time ago. And so looking at what's happening now and how people are really, um, I mean, the push for people are fighting, people are criticizing, and it seems to be the attitude in society that, hey, pick a topic, let's gripe about it. And so, gosh, why should we do anything good? Because it's not going to work. And so then you got to look to the saints and quotes from the saints that are saying, like, even though there's a lot of evil around, they were still doing good. It's like, hey, can we tell you about, the good work that we're doing is because we're loved. We're doing this because of who loves us and how we want to share that with other people. And so that's how Christianity spread through the Roman culture, because the Roman culture and our culture right now is pretty equal. I mean, with just all the evil stuff that's going on, and to say like, hey, contrary to that, we're going to live helping each other and service and the fortitude of doing what's right, even if they'll cancel you, or even if they'll fine you and say, oh, you're doing it wrong, and we're going to come hassle you or put more requirements on you or tax you or some other kind of thing to get you to stop. Because I don't want to be afraid to do good just because there's evil in society. Number 9 is I'm trying not to complain the whole time about bad things I see around me. And on the contrary, I try to do something positive to resist the negative influences. And so that's, again, a good way to practice fortitude, is to say, I'm going to do the good thing. I'm going to do something that's loving, something that's helpful, because it's really what's needed. And that's really what's missing in society right now, pretty much in the world, is folks are really, they're protective, they're reactive, and they're critical. And we're going to say, no, in fortitude, we're practicing the right thing. We're doing the good thing in spite of the evil, even if it hassles us. We're going to do something good. We're going to do something helpful. We're going to assist people that need the assistance, even though it might not be a positive thing to do. And that's saying like the world needs good examples. The world needs people to be living out the good that we know is there and being forgiving. And being forgiving is something that really is a lot missing in society. And then we're looking at number 10, overcoming fear, indifference, or my need for security in order to carry out real worthwhile activities. So fortitude means taking risks, being magnanimous, thinking about worthwhile values, being enthusiastic about life. And it's not incompatible with doing good and having virtue, but it is incompatible with being mediocre. And that tends for desire for security. Like, I'm just going to make what I need for me to stay safe. So if things fall apart, I've got my supplies. And something that happened in other countries where they have had like economic collapse or something like that, that, and there's books written about that saying like what people did is the folks that made it through formed groups and they cooperated like the early Christian communities. So like they were supporting each other, they were helping each other as a group, as a community, doing things that were worthwhile, helping each other. Where people that were all kind of focused on themselves, they were the ones that got attacked. They were the ones that got kidnapped or robbed. And because they were out away from a group of people that could protect them and help them. So the idea of kind of like in the safety and security of a community working together to practice good and to be the good example. And that's where we're finding a lot of charter schools and Catholic schools are growing because they have values that they're teaching the children and their families are working together and supporting each other that the public schools aren't having. The public schools are more like, well, we got to lower the standards to whatever the slowest person is or the least functioning person is. And so the teachers are leaving the schools here in the public schools because they're burning out because the kids are getting violent. Where the kids in the Catholic schools, they're growing, they're working together, the families are a community, they're helping each other, they're overcoming that indifference or the evil in society by working together on worthwhile goals of having values that they're teaching children. Okay, so there we can take another pause and look at questions about fortitude. And then I guess feedback on how do you like this style, because we still have a little bit of time left. We got more virtues to go through. Is this style okay? I mean, because I'm only going through like half of the things in the notes and just kind of describing them, but
Yes, yeah, you're doing great. Yeah.
Okay.
Great,
Any
yes.
questions? Questions about fortitude, or is that good? If there is, we can come back. Otherwise, we can go because we're running on time because I'm talking a lot. Optimism is the next one. And so for optimism, optimists have confidence based on reason in their own abilities and the help that they can get from others and the ability of others. And thus, in every situation, they can identify, first of all, positive elements and opportunities for improvement. And secondly, the difficulties and obstacles that get in the way of the improvement, like we can problem solve with that. And then they take advantage of everything favorable and face up to the rest in a sportsmanlike or cheerful manner. So that's kind of an orientation to optimism. And so just, I guess, to be different on this one, if we're looking at, am I optimistic myself? But say like, how about with shift, we'll do the bottom half this time, the teaching others to be optimistic. And are you really looking at here saying like, do I create situations so that children can live joyful lives? Is there a joyful atmosphere? The children are more likely to discover what's positive around them. And so the idea of if I can be, looking at here's the good things in life. And I mentioned last time that they've got like right now 2 years of medical research saying that gratitude has the same effect as pharmaceuticals. So medication for anxiety and depression and gratitude has an equal value. So being optimistic, who knew? The saints were talking about being optimistic. Look at who loves you. Look at who you're loving, who you can help, who helped you, what you did well. That's all part of the virtue of optimism, which ties into gratitude, which, modern secular science is finding. Say like, that cures depression and anxiety. So How do I have that? Can I create situations that children can live their life more joyously? Because we're looking at, hey, good job, you did that well. If they're doing homework, to say they can bring it up and say, let's look at what you got right. How come you got that right? Well, you're working hard. You're getting smarter. That's, you're learning more skills. That's all part of that, making it more optimistic instead of like, oh my gosh, I have to do my homework. It's, hey, let's look what you did well. And it's pretty easy to talk to children, say if they're in third grade, to say, this is hard this year. You're learning cursive, you're learning multiplication. But if we put you back in first grade, would that be easy or hard? And they'd be like, oh, that'd be easy. I'm like, right, because you already have those brain pathways. Third grade, you're building those brain pathways this year. That's why it's hard. You're physically building brain pathways. If they put you up in sixth grade, that would be too hard. You wouldn't know how to do it. And so this every year you're building more brain pathways, you're making it easier. And that's how you can check it, by going back to last year and saying, like, look at that. I can do that now. And it's really easy. So you have the knowledge in you already. So that's a way to shift it to be more optimistic when they're looking at, the children doing a chore or doing their homework. Number 12 could be, I center my attention on what's positive in each child so they learn to develop self-confidence. And so something that they had a problem with in this country was like, hey, we'll just give everybody an award. And when I do that in the class, I would write something and I would say, like, okay, I would just write a piece of paper saying, like, fastest runner in the state of Idaho. And I'd give it to a kid, like, there you go, you're the fastest runner. What do you think of that? And he's like, nothing. Just like, it's just words. But if I say, hey, I did this, and look at that, now I can pass that spelling test. It's like, now I can say, oh, I'm actually doing something and I'm getting recognized for what I did. It's like, wow, I'm organized. I show up to class on time. I'm learning things really fast in math. And I figure stuff out in science, or those kind of things, where I'm looking at how they're doing and what they got right to develop that sense of confidence. But it has to be based on something they actually did, not just give them a compliment and say, like, oh yeah, you got 17th place, good job. It's just like, you showed up, here's your ribbon. And so they do actually have 17th place ribbons. I was just really surprised about that. So it's just looking at, I want to base it on something that they actually did rather than just giving them words. 13 is, I'm going to help the children to get to know themselves, to be realistic about their qualities, capacities, and so that they can take best advantage of them. And so one of the things that's really helpful for children is to be able to say, the school's teaching you and saying, like, oh, do this again, fix this math problem, change those spelling words, rewrite that paper, read that book. They're really looking on, we're going to fix some of the things you don't know how to do. And so as a parent, to be able to look at the child saying, like, hey, let's look at what you're good at. Because some people, like, if they like numbers, they're going to be really good. They might go into a career that's using a lot of math. And there's other folks that say, like, man, I never want to be in a classroom. I want to be outside. And then we're looking at, hey, you're really good at fixing things. And I know there's a boy here that just hates school, and he doesn't want anything to do with, writing papers and all these, technical reports. But if you give him, some tools and a tractor, he can attach things to the tractor or build things and fix things and repair things on the farm equipment. And he loves it. He'd be out there all day, and he's working with his uncle and his dad, and they're doing a lot of, farm equipment repair and maintenance. And he likes farming. He wants to be on a tractor and just, growing crops. And I knew somebody else that was like, hated math, but he wants to be a rancher and raise cattle. So the idea is saying, like, hey, here's the kind of math you use for figuring out how to grow the crops and the hay to feed the animals, and how much water to give them, and how much, medicine they need, and, rotating the pastures. Then he's like, man, I want to do that. So you're really looking at what is the child's skill and ability. And we want to match them, like, yeah, you're good at this. Let's help you get into agriculture, or you're good at this, we'll get into engineering, or you're good at this, we'll get into healthcare. If you're good at cooking, we'll get you into cooking. So, the idea is not everybody thinks the same. Some folks really, they want to be inside working at a desk, and some folks are like, I never want to be inside again. I want to be outside. So, I could be, working out in the forest or working out in the desert. And that's more of an enjoyable place for them. So you're matching what the kids' abilities are to what they're engaging in. So number 14, I create situations where the children can learn to walk alone without my helping them unnecessarily. And so that's one of the discussions I had with someone this weekend, is like saying like, wow, when that child's there and their mom and dad are there, they are just really emotional and whiny and they have a tough time getting anything done. But when they have somebody that's saying like this one boy that was like, he's the quartermaster for our scout troop and he's in charge of all the camping gear and the stuff that we need for cooking and camping and going out in the woods. And when he's working with other adults or other scouts, he's fine and he does a really good job and he's detail oriented. But if his parents are around, he tends to be like, oh, I can't do this. And I don't know if I'll be able, and he's a lot more needy and a lot less capable. And so the really, I want to try to help shift the child to be able to do things without me. And so maybe the first step would be I do it for them to show them. And then the second step would be now we're doing it together and we're working on it. And then the third step is like, now you do it and I'll kind of be here if you need me. And then the fourth step is you go ahead and do it yourself. So emotional learning takes like those 4 steps where I've got to see one and then we'll do it together, kind of help me figure it out. And then I'm there getting your help if I need it, and then I'll do it on my own. So that those 4 steps is emotional growth, emotional learning, and that's a really good way to help them be able to walk alone, do their life without having to be living at home forever, saying like, "Mom, I can't do it. You got to do it for me." Okay. So then we're looking at showing love and trust to the children so that they can have enough self-confidence to act responsible in their own lives. And so that loving and trusting are not sufficient. They must be manifested. Only in this way, many youngsters launch themselves into worthwhile actions. They take advantage of all their talents. So that idea of we're building in this optimism, saying like we're starting with it's a joyful thing to do, then we're doing stuff that's helpful, then we're building it in stages, their ability to do it. And so that then, I'm not just being loving and trusting, I'm training them to do this, to have the self-confidence. And you say like, yeah, good job. You got that done. And then they're accepting that responsibility. And then you can talk about it later saying like, okay, now that you've done that, how do you feel about helping that person? How do you feel about the good that you did? And that's something that as an adult, you can look at. I have people coming in, as adults looking, they're coming in, they're like, oh man, there's so much work. I can't get it all done. They're kind of in crisis mode, like there's too much to do, not enough staff, and they're just burning out. And so that shift in optimism is to say, like, okay, I'm helpful. I'm going to help you take care of this crisis. And then somebody else comes up and you're saying, like, okay, well, I know you want help with your crisis, but I'm helping this person with their crisis first. And then I'll help you. And then a third person comes up, like, hey, I'd be glad to help you as soon as I finish this first person, then the second person, the third person. But in just talking like that, I'm glad to help you as soon as I'm done helping over here. I know this is important, but that was modeling enough so that after about 2 weeks of that, the lady was saying that, as a manager, I'm running 7 different departments. And I started, instead of being all crisis in 7 departments, I started helping one and then making an order to do them in. And she says, after 2 weeks of just talking like that, the people started helping each other. And so there was less crisis. And so after about a month, he says, hey, it was really an enjoyable place to work. We still had the same amount of work and the same shortage of staff, but the attitude everybody used now was more optimistic about we get to help people for this many hours a day, and then we help each other while we're helping those people. And that shift, being more responsible, taking part in my own life and helping others with theirs, really did make a difference in kind of spreading that optimism to other people. Number 16, when objective negative things occur, for example, an illness or lack of loyalty in a friend or failing an exam, I tend to help the children look for something positive in this situation. And because their initial reaction usually is, oh my gosh, this is so terrible, I'm going to flunk out. And with some really emotional kids, they're like, I flunked out, I did so bad, I got to quit school or I got to kill myself. So like, well, it's not that bad. Let's look at this, saying like, what else can you do? What's some other options? Because that initial reaction is nothing can be done, it's all bad. And what we're doing is then just giving them the space to say, is that true about everything all the time? Is there any exception? Let's shift now to how can, you can retake the test, or you can study for the next one and do better. If it's something like that failing an exam thing, loyalty in a friend is saying like, well, are they always bad all the time? Or is this just they made a mistake and now, they can repair that for you? And so some of the kids you get talking to saying like, okay, if I have that, are we able to do that in a way that helps them to get through the difficulties that they're going to face there? And it looks like people are shifting the page. So let's just say, did anybody have any more questions about optimism? Because that was something there to kind of say, we had just a general idea there. You're talking with the children about trust in God. You're trying to create situations where children tend to fail the most, have opportunity to succeed at something. You want to organize the activities so the kids are involved and they're doing something useful. And you want to teach children to ask for help they need to carry out their projects instead of just they got to do it themselves or just quit. So that's optimism. Questions, comments, thoughts about that? Or you can jump to the next one is perseverance. Okay. I'm not seeing anything on my chat. So if there is, let me know. Otherwise, we'll go through perseverance. So perseverance, once a decision is made, a persevering person takes the steps necessary to achieve his or her goal in spite of internal or external difficulties and despite anything which might weaken their resolve over the course of time. So the idea of I'm persevering is I'm going to do it all the way to the end, not just, oh, I did it at the beginning because it was fun. I'm going to be like saying, no, I'm really going to be working on following this through there. So if we have that setting, set myself goals for the future, that's another way to persevere. And you might need small goals that you're working towards and then bigger goals. So if you had stuff, what do I want to get done this month? What am I going to do next month? And then 3 months from now, where you have a lot of details for this first month, and then an outline for the second month, and just kind of a bullet point kind of schedule for the third month. The idea is I'm working towards the goal. So I'm making progress towards whatever it is that I'm trying to reach. If it's a career change or getting employed or, helping, so many families by summertime. Number 2 would be fixing stages towards the goal in order to check whether I'm making progress. And one of the things, and if you look at motivational interviewing and some of those shows, they're really saying like, well, what's different now than what happened 2 weeks ago? Is there anything different in your life today than what you did 2 weeks ago? And if there isn't, then let's look at making a goal. What's one thing I want to change? And picking one thing specifically I want to do in a different way is going to move me forward. Where if I'm just like, well, hey, I'm a good person, that might not go so far. Okay, so then when I think of future goals, I also try to foresee possible problems to overcome them if there arise. And that's that idea of like I talk through things with families and say, okay, how's this? This is a good plan. Here's how it's going to go. And then the second half is like, let's flip it around and say, what can go wrong with this? What's some possible obstacles? So we're kind of looking at it ahead of time to say, if that happens, how will we solve that problem? And so the idea is that I can keep working forwards instead of like, oh, I got there and then boop, there was an obstacle, so I just stop. If I'm looking at it with that working toward a goal, that's gonna make a difference. So a question I had in the chat is the goal doesn't have to be attained. It's that I'm working towards it. And there's something just about the biology of how we're made is that we are really looking at working towards the goal is really what makes us happy. Achieving the goal doesn't really last very long to say like, okay, I did that. Now I need something else to work towards. And so the idea of that I'm moving forward, and that's where if we're practicing virtue, to say if I'm practicing this virtue and I build it up like perseverance, I'm practicing this virtue to get it. And then you say like, okay, then I can look at optimism. And they say, okay, now I'm working on optimism so that I'm working towards bettering myself in some way. And so if that helps to kind of think of that. Um, so once I've decided to achieve a goal, I do all I can to pursue it. And so if I'm working on perseverance, I'm going to keep practicing. If I'm working on humility, I'm going to be taking the time to say, what's a place specifically I can be more humble, and then I'm going to be, persevering towards that. So that's um, taking that goal, making a step, working towards it. Do I ask for the help at the right time to pursue my goals? So if I'm looking at, some people have a lot of goals, but they give up after the first moment and they change their objectives from one moment to another. And if I keep changing the topics, it makes it difficult to meet the goals that I have. So something, just as an easy example, a lot of people say, oh, New Year's resolution. I'm going to lose weight or I'm going to exercise. And, for the first month, the gyms are full. They have a lot of membership, and then folks kind of drift away like, oh, I got busy. I didn't want to go. And so that it kind of drifts away and people don't stay working towards that goal. And that's just an example of, society folks saying like, I want this, and then it fades off. Or I'm going to eat healthy, and then I shift into eating, less healthy food. Um, So I want to make sure that I'm regularly striving towards making effort that makes sense, so it doesn't just turn into an empty routine. So it's not just like, oh, I'm busy and I'm doing this. For example, with our group, they said like, okay, we're starting with getting up, we're saying the Angelus at 6, noon, and 6. So you have daily, 3 times a day on purpose, you're getting involved with praying the Angelus. I'm bringing to mind. So it's like to make it not an empty routine, just like, oh, there's the clock. It went off. Bing, let's go ahead and now just say the words. I really want to kind of say, let's bring up and use my imagination and picture, there's Mary, there's the angel at the Annunciation. And there's Mary's response to the angel, be it done to me according to your word. And then Jesus is born, and you're looking at, hey, there's the nativity. And so it gives you this chance of like, now I'm having this relationship and this discussion, and that's something that really could be useful in persevering in your prayer, is that I'm not just saying the words, but I'm taking the time, I'm using my imagination, I'm using, the words, I'm slowing down, I'm letting myself be really present to the spiritual thing that's going on around me. So it's not an empty routine. And when I set up some new goal, um, which is objectively important, I look for something that I can get out of my life. So a lot of times that's saying, I'm really busy. I can't just keep adding things and adding things. And that's where I get a lot of people that are just, oh my gosh, I'm so busy. I don't have time for this. And to say, well, what can I take out of my day so I can put this in there? Or if it helps, then to look at over my week, is there a way I can put it in over the week or over a month? I'm putting things, I'm looking at a longer schedule to arrange things that way so that then I can fit something in. But then to say what's less important, let's take that out. And so sometimes as couples, people might need to say, let's take some time and look at what's the important things that we really want to work on in our marriage or as our family. And what's the things that maybe not so important that we can, let those go. We really want to kind of say we got effort to put in on these 3 values, and those other 6 are going to be just, if we get to them, great. So I'm prioritizing so that I can persevere. And then I'm frequently in the sacraments regularly to keep my faith alive. That's really important. And that's something that, just that I've heard recommended a lot. And saints have talked about it, saying like the daily prayers, regular, getting to mass, to communion, to the sacraments, and regular confession and reconciliation. That really does keep your mind clear, keep your heart calm, and allows you to move forward a lot easier, because then you keep stepping out of the world to kind of line up with, I'm going to heaven, I'm on a journey, instead of like, oh my gosh, let's look at this stuff. We got to have more stuff, and getting pulled away into the materialism in the world, or selfishness that way. And then I'm asking for God's help constantly to lead a good life so that those who depend on me will be able to do that. And then we'll be able to persevere in our own faith growth. And we're going to be doing prayer, we're studying, we're living the life of faith as we understand it, and we're always growing. And spiritual direction would be a good thing to add in there. to make sure that you're focusing on, goals that are attainable, and you're not putting goals in your life they're like, I can't ever do that. And just something as a little aside note to say, it was really easy for me when I started to see, well, yeah, it's easy to see people get tempted to do bad things. But you also, when you're trying to be virtuous and you're trying to live these virtues, something you got to watch for is that you're tempted toward perfectionism. And the benefit the devil gets out of pushing you to perfectionism is you can't reach it. And so then you get like, oh, I can't make it. Then they attack with, see, you're terrible. And they push you to say, well, just quit it all. And so that's kind of the trap of like, I get tempted to bad stuff or tempted to sin, or I get tempted to perfection. That's kind of the two extremes. And you really want to be kind of, I'm here, I'm focusing on these goals in this order, making these steps to grow in virtue. And that's really going to help me. And if I have a spiritual director to kind of help me prioritize things, that's really going to be helpful as well. And so I see we're running on time. I'm going to say, any questions on perseverance? And we can get to orderliness as we kind of cruise into the end zone here. Any chats, any questions, comments? And then just looking at in this format, because like we say, we've got several more classes. If this format's useful, if you're
Yeah.
interested in doing that.
Yes,
Yes.
Dr. Joe. Just a comment. What
Okay.
I find is that as you go through the list and I am able to compare to my own life, what I do, my own attitude, decision making, and all of this, it makes a lot of sense. And then I'm like, oh, right, that is why, and so I'm able to identify it's what you're saying. And because I'm able to identify, with what you're saying, I can now identify the areas that I need to work on. So I'm really grateful for you sharing this with us tonight. That's just my comment. Thank you.
All right. Thanks for that feedback. Okay, so then for the last one, we'll go into orderliness, the last virtue we're covering today. And that one is orderly people follow logical procedures. It's essential to achieve any goal. And that when you're organizing things, time, activities, so that I'm carrying it out on my own initiative without having to be constantly reminded. And so the virtue of orderliness is I'm practicing these things, which have to be done regularly, and I'm wanting to get them done in a way that is going to help me make that move forward. And something that's kind of a joke my wife and I have is just that she's always trying to save me steps. She's always trying to help me be more organized and more orderly. So she's really helping me develop this virtue. And so if you can see it as my spouse is helpful, they're giving me some suggestions that's going to make my life more orderly rather than, oh my gosh, all they're doing is attacking me. That's that shift from, that reactive part says, oh, you're attacking me. And optimistic front brain is saying like, oh, you're helping me be organized. You're helping me get some things done. So that's really another way of shifting kind of in the virtues that we're talking about today. It's really, yeah, my spouse is trying to help me. So am I orderly myself? We can look at this as saying like, I have a clear hierarchy of values for my own life. What's important? And how I'm doing that. And what, if it helps to say, what age are my children? What's something important for them to learn this year? And different ages, they're going to learn different things. And so we can kind of prioritize that. But it's good to talk about amongst your family to say, this is the year we're talking about that. So like third grade, they're learning multiplication. They're learning to write in cursive, in some schools. Some schools are trying to do it in second grade. And, it's like they're really having these skills. In our school, they have the eighth graders work on, they do a live Stations of the Cross during Lent. And so before that, they're practicing their parts. Each person, they dress up in, they have the costumes, they have the outfits, they have the props, and it's like a movie scene. They're putting on the live Stations of the Cross. And so they have this hierarchy of values. So that's just an example that the school is using. But for my own life, I still need that. Values that I'm teaching, what's more important, what's less important. And again, that range of what's more important, what's less important is a good tool to get you out of that just reacting to say, this is the only thing. And then I have this big crash if someone doesn't let me do that one thing. I can say, well, I can do that one. If that's not available, I can go to the next one on the list. And like we were talking about with the previous virtue, is let's problem solve. Let's make this what could go wrong, and we'll shift it around so that I'm able to see what kind of things are more valuable, but there's other things of value. So I can stay working towards a goal, stay working towards being orderly, stay working on these virtues. Okay, so number 2, I usually act according to some logical rules. So there's a consistency between what I say, what I think, and what I do. And so unpredictable behavior, which only obeys your feelings at the moment, or pure reactions to give a situation, that's where I'm acting without thinking. I'm just reacting to things. And that's a lot of what society is pushing, is just reacting. Like, pick a topic, they'll gripe about it. That's what they're good at, because they want to sell advertising. So they want to make you react, so you'll watch that show. And so they're trying to get an emotional reaction that's negative so they can make money. That's kind of the driving force behind that, where you're saying like, no, I don't want to be, really reacting like that. I want to be thoughtful and organized going forward there. I want to know that what I'm looking for, and that I try to be orderly. And in this manner, being able to justify the orderliness in everything. And so for my life, I would say like, oh yeah, I'm really good with work. But if you look in my garage, oh my gosh, it's kind of like a bomb went off. There's just like stuff everywhere. So it's like, oh, I need to work on orderliness in that part of my life. That's a weakness that I have. So the idea of, can I be consistent, and I know what I'm looking for, and when I try to be orderly, I can find it. And so I have some of my life that way. A lot of my work is that way, but there's some areas that still need some improvement. And so number 4, I try to be orderly to facilitate living together in a group, or to make it more efficient. Like to say, we have people like that set the table, people that cook the food, then we eat, and then there's people that do the cleaning up afterwards. So that would be a nice, like a duty roster, or a schedule for who's doing what help at what times. And so that's going to help me be able to do things. And that order is good for the whole group, the whole community. And they have one of the monasteries here in the area that they have, 2.5, 3 hours of prayer a day. They're doing what work they do, and then they stop and they come back for prayer. And then they go back. And so it's like they're constantly resetting back to that calm. We're focusing on God. And then we go out and do the work. So, and they have a lot of different ministries that they're doing. And so, some of the monks are there for the morning services. Some other ones are there at the afternoon services, and some are there at the evening services. But for their community time in the morning and the evening, all of the monks are there. But depending on their different jobs, they're taking breaks throughout the day. So that order really helps that group work together. And it really is peaceful when you go into that the monastery there on that retreat. Number 5, I usually know where to find my things. I keep them in a sensible place, put them back when I'm finished using them. And this is really easy for teaching children. Like, you use it, you put it back, so then you can find it next time. And so it's not just thrown. And a way to help teach that is really to look at that wider view of saying like, well, it's easy when you get home to just throw your music and the instrument in your room somewhere. But then next time when you have to practice, you have to take the instrument. You got to like search all over for it, where you put the effort of putting it in its place versus the effort of finding it when you're in crisis. And we compare those two, which one works better for you. Then they can see, oh, it is good to put it back in a place so I can find it again next time. But if you just say, put it away, they'll fight you. You might get a reaction of like, oh, I don't want to do it. You're just bossing me around. But if you say, no, we're organized so we can find it, so you don't have the crisis. We want you to be able to plan for things like that. Okay, and then number 6, I divide up all my time well so that the most important things receive the most time. An easy way to think about this with kids when they're studying for an exam is to say, like, finals week is coming up and they have 7 classes. And so I say, well, let's rank order which class is easiest to which class is hardest. And then they will tell me the classes. And they say like, okay, so the easy ones, you could just walk in and get an A. You don't even have to study. And then there's some medium classes. They're like, well, I probably need to review my notes. And then there's the hard class. I'm going to have to spend all weekend looking at what I need for that. But then what we just did is we organized and prioritized where the studying is going. So instead of having 7 classes to study all weekend for, I have 2 classes. And then I study on those. I do really well. The review, I do well. And the other ones, I can just walk in because I already know the material. And so the idea is that dividing it up, rank ordering it, prioritizing it really helps to make your life less stressful. Order really does bring you more peace. Okay, so then number 7, I'm punctual when carrying out my duties. So I get to a meeting, arrive home, keeping my commitments. And that's something that's really, getting, other family members, because there might be some folks that are like, hey, if you show up on time, you're late. Let's show up early, So other folks are like, well, you're starting at 10, I'll be there about 10:30, and you show up a half hour late. That's just their culture. And so you really need to know which group you're talking to. So how does their cultural view of time and punctuality, they show up, but is it like, well, we'll get to it in a half hour, we'll be there, or no, we'll show up right on time, or oh, hey, we're going to be here a little early and standing around waiting. So I really need to know that group that I'm working with, how are they doing it, what's my style, and when I'm going to interact with that group, I need to match my style with theirs so we're all showing up at the same time. And so that's a good way to think about that punctuality and carrying out my duties. I use tools and appliances like computers, electrical equipment, and all that kind of stuff as their instructions. So that's something to be able to say that I'm doing things like reading the directions so I know how to use this. And I'm avoiding the danger of breaking it or doing something that, it won't do it. And then I get mad about it. With kids, it's easy to say they get mad at a video game and they throw the controller. Say like, oh, and then it's broken and now they can't play the game. But in the moment I was mad and I threw it, and so that sense of orderliness is saying I'm using it according to the directions. I can set it down and be mad about the game I lost, but I don't need to smash things, in that kind of a reaction. So I'm taking care of things. And so the idea of saying with teenagers when they're starting to be around vehicles and say like, you know how to put gas in, you know how to fix a tire, you know how to call for help if you need one. Or if they're, going to say, using somebody else's computer or somebody else's laptop, that I can take care of it and they get it back without it being broken. Number 9 is I'm using systems to remember to be orderly in these various fields. So some people have good memories and they remember to put things back in their place. Other people have to have some kind of a reminder, some kind of an instrument, a tool that helps them in remembering that, like birthdays or events. If you're putting on some, like like the church picnic, and you're saying who's bringing what parts of it, who's bringing the furniture, who's bringing the tables, who's bringing the food, who's bringing, the games for the kids to play. You're putting on things. You need to maybe make a list or be organized that way to kind of keep track of all the different things you're going to do. And you're making a conscious effort to remember specific things that need to be done. And that's, like if you have a project you're going on saying like, hey, we're doing like 7 different things, the first one's like a practice one, and then we get better, we make notes on how we did it. And so then you get a flow by the 3rd or 4th thing. You got a flow for this is how this event can run in the future. And that's using systems to remember stuff. Notes are really useful for the virtue of orderliness. And the last one there is I think about how to do things in order to see just how orderly I really am. So I'm kind of thinking about what I'm doing. I'm looking at how things are done. Frequently, people are orderly in some aspects of their life and not with others. Like I'm saying, I'm organized in most places, just not my garage. And so I want to have to find things. I got to dig things and move things around to kind of get to the tools that I need or get to the different camping things that I need. So I could be really organized in one topic and not in another. So they talk about people that are really intelligent, saying like, well, they're really smart, but then their fashion sense, so they don't really worry about how they look when they're dressed, like to go out in public. So the idea is we're working, you're trying to be organized, and that order brings you some calm, and then I'm moving forward. And so putting these things together that we've been talking about this time is that we've really been looking at, how to be orderly, how to persevere, how to be positive when we're sharing about those things, to practice things, doing the right thing, even if it's difficult, and, working towards being generous, and all of those kind of fit together. And, they work together, they support each other. So it really is a network that we're building. And so back to what we were saying earlier about, I really need to focus on one specific thing, and here's how I'm going to do it. And I'm going to grow in that one way, so that I can say, then I can look back and say, hey, what I did this week was better than what I did that past week. I can actually track I'm making progress that way. And there was a spiritual writer that I was reading. She was a French actress in World War I. It was her journals reflecting during adoration. And one of the things she was talking about, and Jesus was talking to her in that message, was saying, like, if somebody picked one thing that they wanted to improve and they worked on perfecting that one thing, that he was saying, like, you would grow to perfection and holiness really rapidly. But the way we're doing it now, we're not orderly, we're not organized, we're just jumping, I'll be good here, I'll be good there, and we're shifting around to different things. And so our progress is a lot slower. And so if that's something, just as a takeaway from all of these, is like picking one specific thing you want to do better by next time, and practice that. And ideally, if you could practice it every day, that's really going to help you grow, and it's going to help those changes come along. And so it's kind of like they say, by going slow, you go fast, because it's like, I'm going slow and being focused, I'm really going to make more progress than by jumping in, trying to do everything, and then burning out and wanting to quit and then say, it doesn't work. So I guess that's the time we have for today. So any comments or questions or suggestions for getting together, if this
I
is
have a
a style that
question.
works?
You earlier, you were speaking about, okay, so the question is on orderliness. What would you advise for a child who seems to have um, order in chaos? For example, whenever they have exams, they take all of the papers and material and they spread them out on the floor. And what seems to be a chaotic type of situation really is ordered for them, because they know where every single piece of paper is. And if you move that, it throws them off. What do you suggest? Do you leave a child to function like that? Or do you help them find a different way
Well,
of organizing?
you have a good point there, is that the first part is that you actually have observed that they do know where the things are, so that it's like orderly for them. And now it's looking, okay, now, but if that's making a problem for the rest of the family or the rest of the class, that's where we're saying, okay, now doing it your way there is causing these problems for other people. How can we adjust this so they're adjusting their what looks like chaos order to say, now we have to fit it in this place so it's not hassling the other kids in the class or the other people in the house. And so then you're working on having that shift more towards something that other people will be able to work on and work around. So it's, if they have like, if there's a certain place that they can do it that way and it's not causing a problem for the house or the other people, then to say, okay, that style works for you, you can do it over there where it's not bothering us. But if it's out in the middle of the living room and everyone's having to walk through this place, they say, like, oh, we need to move this, so we're going to have to start that discussion. But just wanted to claim that you had a really good observation that from the kids' point of view, it is ordered, it is organized. But now we have to say, let's widen that out beyond just you. How do we include the rest of the family so we don't have to all go around you? You're going to get it into a space that's not taking over the rest of the house or disrupting the class. Is that helpful?
Yes, thank you.
So, hi, one question I have, actually two questions. The first one, so what period of time would you recommend spending working on each virtue? And then the second question is, can you work on both yourself and your child at the same time if you're working on that same virtue? Or do you focus on building your own virtue in one area and then work on your child once you've mastered the virtue?
Well, the idea there is really, it's good. I'm teaching me to do it a new way and the child to do it a new way at the same time. So we can do both at the same time but I'm going to be slow and thoughtful about, hey, I'm really focusing on, I'm sharing this with the child. So like if you were saying, okay, we're going to teach orderliness for who sets the table, who's cooking the dinner, who's clearing the table, who's doing the dishes. And so that sense of I'm training myself not to yell at you when you're doing this. So I want to be able to come in and say, that's the specific thing. I'm training myself not to yell. And I'm training the child to get the dishes set on the table for the meal. And so then I'm practicing that specific thing so I can be calm and teach them that order, that orderliness for that. And then that might take, so that would be ideally I'm doing it every day. If they're home, you can do it in the morning and the evening. That's twice a day. That's going to be even better because I'm practicing and the child's practicing. They're going to get it faster. And then after a week or maybe 2 weeks, they say, okay, now they can set the table without being yelled at. Now we'll look at what's the next step is like, okay, after dinner, who's clearing the table? And we're focusing on that specific thing. So I'm not yelling, getting them to clear the table. Come back, clear the table. Come back, clear the table. So it's just practicing that specific thing. So yes, you can train yourself and the child on the same thing at the same time. But then the rest of the time, I'm not going to be like, I'm just practicing it those specific times so that if I tried to do it every day, all day long, it gets really, might be too frustrating and I'd want to quit. So one of the things I learned when I was first trying this is I tried to do everything all at once and then it didn't work and I got upset. And so then I said, well, let's try this again. This time I'm training just one thing and training the one thing. They got it after 2 weeks. And then when they get the second thing, it comes a little faster. And then the third thing, it comes even faster. So then by the fourth thing you're doing in that one virtue, I have now how to talk about this. And the children say, oh, that's how we do it now. And so it's that progression where as you get more things in that virtue, it does get easier and it kind of takes on a life of its own and it is helping you move forward. But being specific is really the tool to best use to your advantage. Is that good?
Yep, thank you. There's one other thing. So what period of time would you suggest working on one virtue before moving on to the other virtue? So for instance, if I'm working on, I don't know, generosity, when do I say work on fortitude? Because I know you suggested not focusing on, two virtues at the same time, but so when do you wait till you master a virtue before moving on to, working on the next?
Well, I think the first, if you could say just as a general starting point to say, like, if we practice for a month, this one virtue, just because it's going to take some time to get that flow for the family to say, okay, this is how we're doing generosity. And so if you practiced it might be 5 minutes a day or 15 minutes a day, every day for a month, and then say, okay, now the family has that. We're moving forward. Now we can add the next one in, say, like, now we can do a month on that next one. So that could be a good starting point. And some people might get it faster. Some people say, like, oh, I just can't be generous, and it's just like it might take, say, okay, we've tried that one. Let's just keep persevering and practicing till that and starts to go. And like that previous comment saying, like, well, this child's style is just, they're organized all over the house. Like, well, let's help them be organized in their room. And then from there to be, can they organize on their bed or on a desk or at the table? And so I'm reducing the area that's chaos. Since they know the system, I just want to make it narrower and smaller so it's like the size of a desk eventually, rather than taking up the whole living room. And so if you say give a month for that, and then we can adjust it or go on to the next thing.
Gotcha.
Just
And
the idea.
And one last question, of all the virtues, which one, if this is even a thing, which one would you start working on first?
Well, if you would, I mean, the list that we're going through, personally, I would start with one that's easier. And so that could fit for, different ones for different families. But if I start with one that's easy, it's like I've already got part of a pathway built here, and then I'm widening it to add a second virtue. I'm going to make more progress as opposed to saying like, oh, you got to get this perfect, humility first, and then you get the other ones. I'm more of a, let's start with what's already, I'm going in that direction. That's my skill. I'm going to do that direction, and then I'll widen that out. And with your kids, if they have like, they're really good at persevering, to say, okay, some people would call it stubborn, but say like, wow, you really persevere. Let's work on that, and to kind of widen that out into, can you persevere now in this second thing? And then can you widen that into, being generous, and just to start with what's kind of naturally, I already have that talent, or I have that part of that virtue already. Because that way you're building on success. So,
All right,
sorry,
thank
there's
you.
not like a template, like, no, you have to do this one first. It's like, God likes variety. So I'm comfortable with that.
Thank you.
Any other comments? I know I've kind of didn't go as far over as last time, but I still went over. So I'll work on narrowing my explanations and stories down. Any other thoughts, comments, things people would have for next time? I guess in looking at next time, on the schedule that I sent to Father was that we would have, we're meeting next Sunday, and we're covering responsibility, respect for others, sincerity, modesty, and moderation. Would be kind of the 5 for next time, if that works for people. Okay. Thanks for showing up.
Thank you very much, Dr. Joe.
You're welcome.
Question, announcement before I give you the final blessing tonight. Thank you very much for taking time. We had a busy day today and coming for this session tonight. We're going to start May devotion on Wednesday. And we're just looking at the best time that is favorable for many persons. When do we think is the best time to start? It's not compulsory for those who can.
On Wednesday, the time?
We're looking at every day through. On Wednesday, okay, go ahead.
No, I was just thinking it could be maybe 8 o'clock on Wednesday because of the fair persons are going and they're going to help. But it could change for the other days. But Wednesday, we could start at 8.
I would like to support Tani's suggestion, but I would go a step further, 8 o'clock every night except Thursday when we have Bible study. That's my suggestion.
All right, we'll see how that goes, okay? Those who are willing to lead, you inbox me, I will send you the format on what we're going to do. So, in the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen. Heavenly Father, we thank you for tonight. We ask you to bless Dr. Joe and his entire family. As much as he has given, may he receive double of those graces that has, that he has shared with us tonight. May you bless him, protect him, and guide him. For us who have received this teaching tonight, help us to practice this. Help us to be able to plan our life in accordance to your will. You said in your word that orderliness is important. We believe that we're living our lives in accordance to your will is by building virtues. Help us to give priorities in our lives in building virtues. Grant us the grace to overcome temptations. Grant us the grace to stay in grace and to avoid sin, particularly mortal sin. And when we do sin or we do fall, grant us the grace to quickly run to confession. Almighty God bless you tonight, be with you, and grant you a wonderful week. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. All right, I wish you a wonderful